Alright, this week you guys are going to get started on the all wind up plane, or winded up plane, whatever you want to call it. Second and probably most difficult challenge in the fixed wing flight unit for problem solvers. Alright, so this is a sample of the plane that you guys are going to be creating. Pretty delicate. It's going to require you guys to apply some of that background knowledge we talked about earlier in the unit. And it's also going to demand a whole lot of precision and definitely some patience. Alright, materials you guys might need to use. You're going to get one 5-inch propeller. You'll get some sections of tissue paper. Okay, you'll get one straight pin like this. You get a 12-inch section of this thicker balsa right here. I'm going to try to get you 3/16 by 3/8 inch balsa. I don't know how much I have available though. You get some 1/8 by 1/8 inch balsa. And then you get a large rubber band. No other materials are really authorized for use, nor are they going to be needed. Hand tools that you guys might need: a pair of scissors, a ballpoint pen or a pencil, miter cutter, utility knife. I'll put a set of these blue-handled cutters out there on each of the tables. You guys use a hot glue gun, 12-inch ruler, and some roller glue. Maybe some electrical tape or some painter's tape. You'll need some sort of tape out there. Okay. Alright, to get started, we're going to start with the fuselage. So for the fuselage, you're going to use this larger balsa right here. So using a ruler, measure out a 12-inch section of it. Measurements are kind of precise. Got to be precise here because the measurements as this plane is designed will help it achieve balance. So you can use a miter cutter or a utility knife to cut right on your mark. Nice and easy. Don't chop. And you have a 12-inch section for your fuselage. Okay. Now the prop that you guys are going to use, if you notice, the prop mount itself is considerably larger than the balsa. So what we're going to have to do is build it up just a little bit. So take some electrical tape, start wrapping it really, really tightly around one end of the balsa. But wrap it really tightly. I'm going to get a good build up. You might have to do this in a couple different attempts. But wrap a few layers around there. Give it a fit test to see how it fits on there. Okay. Still got a little bit of a gap there, so I'm going to need to wrap it just a little bit more. You want that thing to fit snugly on there because you don't want it tilting at all, because you want that hook in line, perfectly in line with the rubber band that's going to power the propeller. That's going to help it work a bit more efficiently. Alright, that fits on there pretty snugly. I don't think it's going to deflect anymore. Alright, so once you have installed that motor, the bottom part, the hook, that's going to be the bottom of your fuselage. So keep that in mind as we go into the next step. Alright, for the next step, you're going to make a mark on the bottom of the fuselage about 9 inches from the front. Here's the front. Make a small mark there, right on the bottom of the fuselage. It's kind of hard to see. Okay, but at that point, that's where we're going to insert the pin. That's going to be your rear hook. So you got to be careful on this one right here. What you want to try to do, point it towards the front of your fuselage. Okay, the end is going to be pointing away towards the back of the fuselage. Push it in at about a 45-degree angle. Try to keep it in the center of that fuselage. You don't want it blowing out the side. But it's got to be angled like that in order to hold that rubber band in place. This is going in there pretty well. If it feels like it's a little bit loose, you might want to pull it out, coat it with some hot glue, and then reinsert it. I think that'll hold securely enough for our rear hook. All right, once you have that done, you can go ahead and set it off to the side. All right, the next thing you're going to start doing is you're going to work on the frames for your wing, for your rudder, and for your stabilizer. Okay, first step, we're going to work on that wing. Go ahead and cut out these two halves right here, and you're going to join them together to form one long 12-inch wing. I've pre-cut it already, just to speed things up just a little bit. So using that 1/8 inch, oh, that's almost perfect. That 1/8 inch balsa wood, you're going to cut out a perimeter for your wing. I just need to trim off a little bit of this one right here. Okay. So once you've cut one of them, one of your long ends, you can just mark and cut it, the second one, at the same length. Okay. Here's my first one. Lay it down next to the second one, mark it, and cut it using the miter cutter. Please, when you're done with the miter cutter, close them up. Okay. I would go ahead and build this thing right on top of your wing template. It's really important that you keep these things as square as possible and don't let it get warped. Because if your wing gets warped, it's going to affect its flight characteristics. Okay. Now we're going to work on the sides. Same thing. I'm going to cut one to length, and then I'm going to use that to cut the next one. Here's my good piece. Set it side by side. Mark it. And cut. Now to speed things up a little bit, we are going to use hot glue. Hot glue weighs a lot. You don't want any of your airplanes to weigh too much because it's going to adversely affect its flight. Okay? So look, just use enough hot glue to hold that thing together. Right to the end. So you can see it's just a little dot of glue there. You don't need very much. Since these materials are lightweight, you're going to get glue strings all over the place. Just be as careful as you can with those glue strings, because they'll start tearing tissue paper and twisting your frames off square. Alright, that's good and square. If you want to check it with a square, that might not be a bad idea. Alright, so there's my wing frame. I'll set that aside and allow it to cool. Now repeat the same process for your stabilizer and your rudder. Cut 2 long pieces and 2 short pieces. Just enough glue to hold. This lightweight material, you're not going to need a whole lot. Alright, both of those are nice and square. For the stabilizer and the wing are pretty easy to do. It's the rudder that's going to be a little bit more difficult because it only has 3 sides. Okay. Next, you're going to mark and cut your rudder pieces. Precise marks. Again, use a pen or a mechanical pencil. Probably the best thing to use. Now, since you can have 4 hands doing this, you should be able to do this a lot more quickly than I do it. So a little bit of hot glue shouldn't take too long to cool. Alright, and if we've done this right, then our rudder should be the same width as our stabilizer. Next, you're going to work on your skin. So you've already pre-made all of your frames for your wing, your stabilizer, and your rudder. Now we're going to cover them with tissue paper. All right, I've already rough cut sections of tissue paper out, okay, to pretty close to the same dimensions of those frames. So pretty simple to do. So this is going to wind up being the top, so I'm going to flip it over because the color looks a lot better than this one. All right, so get you a stick of roller glue. Okay, squeeze it to get it started. Squeeze and roll across your frame to give it a good coating of glue. Okay. You don't need a whole lot, but just enough to get it tacky. Alright, so flip your frame over so the glue side is down. Press it into place over top of your wing. Turn it over to smooth everything out. The skin of your wing should be pretty tight on that frame. You just set that aside and let it cool, or let it dry off. Okay. Repeat the same process for your stabilizer. Coat it with glue. Make sure you get the whole surface. You probably want to trim off that excess afterwards. A little tricky to do with a pair of scissors, and you can't do it with a utility knife because it'll just tear the paper. So if you got a little bit of overhang like that, that's fine. I think that that stabilizer is going to work just fine. And our last piece, now you got to really make sure that this one is square, okay? Because we want these 2 points to touch the frame of our stabilizer. I got a little bit of hot glue on the other side, so it's not quite as smooth. I'm going to use this side right here. Cover it with glue. Flip your paper over. And lay the frame down. As you can see, that's kind of delicate work, a little tough to do. So both sides of this rudder are going to be visible, so I guess it doesn't really matter which side you use. You can choose any color you want, kind of customize your plane. What you're going to do is get a piece of tape. You're going to tape 4 toothpicks in a row together. Try to make 2 pairs with about 1/8 of an inch in between them, maybe 1/4. It's going to be mounted to your coffee stirrer, so make sure the gap is about that wide. The other end is going to be mounted to your motor, your fuselage, so make sure it's going to fit in there. If you have to flex them a little bit, it'll be just fine. Hot glue is pretty flexible. So then what you're going to do, in between those 2 pairs, you want to create a little bit of a hot glue bridge. So something like that. Now, since that's a considerable amount of glue, I want to give it a little bit more time to cool. Okay, if they get stuck together, that's fine. When you're done with that, just set them aside to cool. Alright, the next step in this process is a little bit tricky. We want to create a wing dihedral. So basically, it's just a V-shaped notch in the wing. So if we had a flat wing, it's going to not be quite as stable as this dihedral shaped wing right here. So when this propeller is spinning, okay, it's going to be spinning this way, it's going to torque the rest of the body to the left. So the plane is going to bank. If we had a flat wing, as the wing banked, it would lose a considerable amount of lift and it would pretty much just nosedive into the ground and crash. Since we have this dihedral on here, as the prop turns and the plane tilts, as we're losing lift on one wing, we're gaining lift on the other side of the wing right here. Okay, so it basically zeroes out any loss of lift that we might encounter. So to set your dihedral, flip the wing over, skin side down. We have a 12-inch wing, so we want to measure the midpoint, measure to the midpoint of each side of the wing. So there's 6 inches right there. And 6 inches right here. Okay. Then, using your utility knife, make sure the blade is good and sharp. What you're going to do is you're just going to cut about halfway through the balsa. Don't cut all the way. Halfway through the balsa on one side, halfway through the balsa on the other side. Okay? Then all you want to do, get a block of wood, or you can work off the countertop. All you want to do is crack it. You don't want to break it all the way through. So work really, really slowly. So I still have a few fibers on that end that are good to go, and a few on this end that are good to go. I'm basically just going to fold it in half. There you go. Now the next step, you're definitely going to need a couple hands to do that. Since I don't have any extra hands, I'm just going to use some blocks of wood. And I'm going to set them on either side of the wing. I'm going to invert the wing so I have a bit of an A-frame on the top, like an inverted letter V. Then you have to use a ruler. You want that V, the point of that V, to be 3 inches off the table. Right now it's at about 4, so I'm just going to keep separating these blocks until the point of that V is right about 3 inches off the table. And it looks like I'm there. So at that point, just take some hot glue and fill in the cracks that you made. Just enough to fill in the cracks. That'll set that dihedral in place. And that wing will be just as strong as a straight wing. Now if we give that a minute to cool, we're going to create our motor mount. So the motor mount is going to be made up of your coffee stirrer and the toothpicks that we glued together with that glue bridge. So first, put a little bit of hot glue on points where you crack the wing, and center the coffee stirrer right over top of that. We want about a ½ inch overhang on either side, so you can either set it at a ½ inch and just cut off the excess on one side, or we can measure and mark a ½ inch from the edge of the wingtip and then trim it. A ½ inch right there, and ½ inch right there. So you see that's in good shape, it's cooled already. All I have to do is trim with the glue handle cutters. There you go. Move these blocks. Okay, painter's tape might be good to use because it's not quite as tacky, and it might make removing those toothpicks you glued together a little easier. Okay. So I've got two pairs that are glued together with a small glue bridge. Those are going to be installed on either side of the wing. So just a little bit of hot glue. Fit them down over the wing mount. And make sure they're perfectly vertical. Those are a little bit close together. That's okay, the glue is flexible. We can reheat it. So again, as they're cooling, just kind of separate them out a little bit. The toothpicks are flexible, and they're going to fit good and snugly around that motor mount. That one came apart. Dropped a little bit more glue in there. I don't think those are going anywhere. Okay, straight up and down. Set your wing off to the side. Now we're in the finishing stretch here. We're going to install our stabilizer and our rudder. So we're going to install the rudder with the skin side up. So we want to make sure it's centered. That stabilizer measures almost 4 inches across, so we're going to go right about 2 inches. And right about 2 inches here, just a little bit less. We're going to glue that to the very back of the fuselage. Make sure it's centered and make sure it's level. That should look level. Let that cool just a little bit. Okay. Next we'll do our rudder. Just a little bit of glue on either ends. Make sure it's stretched out enough so it fits on the wooden frame of the stabilizer. Also make sure it is perpendicular to the stabilizer. Alright, that's a lot of glue, so we're going to let that cool for just a minute. Then we're going to come back to installing the wing. That's the last step we really have to do. The wing is just going to set about right here. Now the packet it says to install the wing about 2 inches away from the very front of the fuselage. So if you get out a ruler, measure at the 2-inch mark. That's where our very front motor mount is going to go. Okay. So the first thing you might want to do is just try to fit those motor mounts over the fuselage and see if they're going to set in place. So remember, they were a little bit snug before. So your wing is going to sit about like that. Okay. Now remember, our magic number for the angle of attack is about 10 degrees. So just eyeball it. In fact, if you wanted to, you could just take a little bit of duct tape and secure it in place. And then once you're sure you got it right, after a couple test flights, then you can glue it down. I'm pretty confident that that angle of attack is about right. So I'm going to go ahead and set it in there and then just glue it in place. So a little bit of glue on the sides of your motor mount and on the top. Okay, since again we have a lot of glue, give it some time to cool. You should be in good shape. Now you can probably see all those glue strings that are out there. I would try to clean up those glue strings a little bit before you start winding your rubber band. And attempting your first test flights. Alright, so now we've completed the last step of construction of our winded up plane. It's looking pretty good. Might be able to trim up some of this excess skin on the aircraft, but the last thing that we're going to have to do is just install the rubber band. So I'm going to give you a long rubber band like this one. So just stretch it from the front hook back to the safety pin, which is your rear hook. When you wind the prop, wind it clockwise, and when you let it go, the prop will turn. Okay. We'll use you can either wind it by hand, but you're going to wind up counting a lot of turns, or you can use the yellow motor winder that I have. That motor winder will give you 10 rotations for every single crank on the winder. So it'll speed things up just a little bit. There you go. That's the winded up plane right there. Take your time, be precise, be careful. These parts are really, really delicate, but it is so light that even if your plane does crash when you test it the first few times, I don't think you'll have any problem with things breaking unless it runs into somebody or gets stepped on or just rough handled. So as you're manufacturing these parts, just be really, really careful with them. If you want me to give you a shoebox tub to keep some of your components in during the construction process, just let me know. All right, good luck.